Some people think truth is a destination, a finish line you cross where everything becomes clear. That's a fantasy. The truth, more often than not, is a demolition. It's a wrecking ball that doesn't care what you've built or how long you've lived there. It just swings. I've seen that demolition play out on my stage more times than I can count. But the day I met Chris and Jessica, I could feel the building was already condemned. The air backstage was thick with it, a toxic mixture of desperation and self-righteous fury. You could practically taste the rust from the decaying trust between them. My team had briefed me, of course. The file was a familiar story on paper. A young couple, a beautiful little girl, and a cloud of suspicion so dark it had blotted out any light that might have once existed between them. Chris was convinced he was not the father of their 2-year-old daughter, Lily. Jessica swore he was. He had demanded a paternity test, but not just any test. He wanted it done on my stage in front of millions, because he believed it was the only way to expose what he called her web of lies. You see, for Chris, this wasn't about finding an answer. It was about public vindication. He had already tried and convicted Jessica in the court of his own mind. And he wanted me and my audience to be the jury that validated his verdict. When I met him in the green room, he was pacing. The man was a live wire, coiled so tight you felt a spark might jump off him and set the room ablaze. He didn't shake my hand so much as grip it, his eyes wide and searching mine for an ally. "Doctor." "Phil," he said, his voice cracking with a manufactured intensity, "you have to help me. She's a liar. She's been lying to me this whole time, and I just need the world to see it." He had his story, and he was sticking to it. He was the victim, the betrayed man, the noble truth seeker. It was a role he had practiced, a narrative he had polished until it shone. But beneath that shine, I saw something else, a profound and terrifying insecurity. He wasn't afraid Jessica had cheated on him. He was terrified that he wasn't enough, that he was the kind of man who could be cheated on and discarded. The paternity question was just the hook he'd hung that fear on. Then I went to see Jessica. If Chris was a fire, she was a block of ice. She sat perfectly still on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of defiant stillness. She wouldn't look at me at first. When she finally did, her eyes weren't pleading or sad. They were hard. They were the eyes of a woman who had been under siege for so long that she'd forgotten how to be anything but a fortress. "He's crazy," she said, her voice a low monotone. "He's obsessed. This isn't about the baby. This is about him controlling me. He's always done this. Find something, anything, to accuse me of so he can have the power." She had her own narrative, you see. She was the martyr, the wrongly accused, the woman enduring a madman's paranoia. And just like with Chris, I saw the truth hiding underneath. Her anger wasn't strength, it was a shield. Behind it was a deep well of hurt and exhaustion. She wasn't just tired of fighting him, she was tired of fighting for a love she feared was already dead. This is the real work I do. It's not about the he said, she said. It's not even about the results in the manila envelope. It's about excavating the real problem buried beneath the presenting problem. The paternity test was the symptom, not the disease. The disease was a catastrophic failure of communication, a complete erosion of mutual respect, and a dynamic where two people had stopped being partners and had become adversaries in a war of their own making. They weren't there to fix their relationship. They were there to win. And I knew with absolute certainty that even if one of them won, they were both about to lose everything. They were standing on the trigger of a relational bomb, begging me to press it, convinced the explosion would only hurt the other person. That's never how it works. To understand how a house rots from the inside out, you have to look at the foundation. Theirs, I discovered, wasn't built on rock. It was built on a whirlwind. They met, fell hard and fast, and were living together within 3 months. That's not a courtship. That's an emotional hijacking. They were high on the novelty of it all, mistaking intensity for intimacy. Real trust, the kind that can withstand a storm, isn't forged in a fire of passion. It's built slowly, brick by brick, through consistency, vulnerability, and navigating small conflicts that teach you you're on the same team. They skipped all of that. They went straight from the honeymoon to the war zone, and they didn't have a lick of training for it. On stage, I started with Chris. I needed to let him build his case, to let the audience, and more importantly, Jessica, hear the full scope of his obsession. Chris, I said, looking him right in the eye, walk me through this. When did the first crack appear for you? When did you start looking at the woman you supposedly loved and see a liar? He leaned into the microphone. Ready? He had his list. It started small, as it always does. A text message from a male coworker that just said, "See you tomorrow." In a healthy relationship, that's nothing. In Chris's mind, it was coded language for a secret affair. He'd confronted her, and she'd been baffled, then annoyed. Her annoyance to him was proof of guilt. Why would she be angry if she had nothing to hide? You see the circular logic? The trap has no exit. From there, it snowballed. He started checking her phone when she was in the shower. He installed a GPS tracker on her car for her safety, he claimed, but he was really monitoring her every move. He'd call her at work, and if she didn't answer on the first ring, he'd spiral, convinced she was in a broom closet with a supervisor. He told a story about finding a receipt from a coffee shop near her old apartment. He spent 2 days interrogating her about it. Who was she with? Why did she go there? Was she meeting an old boyfriend? She eventually broke down and confessed she just wanted a specific kind of muffin they sold there and didn't tell him because she knew it would turn into a 3-act play of accusation. And what was his takeaway from that? Not that his paranoia was suffocating her, but that she was capable of hiding things from him. Every single piece of evidence he presented was like this, a normal life event viewed through a filter of profound insecurity. He wasn't a detective uncovering a conspiracy. He was a man drowning in his own fear and pulling her under with him. Then I turned to Jessica. "Jessica," I said softly, "what's it like to live in a house where you're the prime suspect in a crime you're not even committing?" That's when the fortress cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. "It's like being a ghost," she whispered. "I'm there, but I'm not seen. He doesn't see me. He sees a collection of his worst fears. I can't have friends. If I laugh at a text message, he demands to see it. If I want to have dinner with my sister, he accuses me of creating an alibi." I stopped telling him about my day because any new name, any new person becomes a potential threat. She described how she started making her own world smaller and smaller, hoping to avoid his triggers. She quit her yoga class because he was suspicious of the male instructor. She muted friends on social media so he wouldn't see them commenting. She was living in a self-imposed prison, and the warden was the man sitting next to her. The pregnancy, she explained, was a brief ceasefire. For a while, his focus shifted, but the paranoia came roaring back after Lily was born. It found a new, more potent target. He started making comments. "She doesn't really have your eyes, does she? It's funny, her hair is so much lighter than ours." He would study the baby's face, not with a father's love, but with a forensic scientist's scrutiny. He was searching for a betrayal in the features of an innocent child. That was the point, Jessica said, where her love began to curdle into something else, contempt. Because he wasn't just attacking her anymore, he was poisoning the one pure thing they had created. He was looking at their daughter and seeing a question mark. This is where the fire starts to rage out of control. When one partner begins to see their own child not as a source of joy, but as a piece of evidence, you are past the point of no return. You're in a free fall. The escalation from that point was fast and brutal. The final trigger, the thing that pushed Chris to contact my show, was, as it so often is, ridiculously small. A friend of Jessica's from high school posted a throwback photo on social media. It was a group shot from a party years before she'd even met Chris. In the picture, she was laughing, her arm casually slung around a male friend. To a rational mind, it was a nostalgic picture. To Chris, it was the Rosetta Stone that decoded her entire conspiracy. He recognized the man. It was someone Jessica had briefly dated. He didn't see a picture from the past, he saw a clue to the present. He built an entire narrative in his head. She had obviously reconnected with this man, they were having an affair, and Lily was the product of that reunion. He confronted her not with a question, but with a verdict. He threw his phone on the table, the picture glowing like an indictment. This is him, isn't it? This is Lily's real father. This, Jessica told me, was the moment something inside her broke. It wasn't a loud, shattering break. It was a quiet, cold snap. The part of her that still cared, that still made excuses for him, that still hoped he would see reason, just died. She had spent years shrinking, pleading, and crying. She was done. She looked at him, the man who was twisting a cherished memory into a weapon, and she felt nothing but a hollowed-out emptiness. So when he screamed, "I'm going to find out the truth. I'll go on Dr. Phil if I have to. I want the whole world to know what you are." She didn't beg him to stop. She didn't cry. She just looked him dead in the eye and said, "Fine. Do it. Let's go. Let's put it all on television. Let's see who's left standing when the truth comes out." You have to understand the psychology of that moment. Her agreement wasn't a surrender. It was the most aggressive act she had left. She was calling his bluff on the biggest stage imaginable. It was a desperate kamikaze mission. She believed so fiercely in her own truth that she was willing to risk public humiliation to prove it, because private humiliation had become her daily reality. She thought, if I can just get that one piece of paper that says he is the father, then the war is over. I win. She was as short-sighted as he was. She couldn't see past the battle to what the aftermath of the war would look like. Their families, as you can imagine, were gasoline on the fire. I spoke to his mother backstage, a sweet-looking woman who, with every word, subtly validated her son's paranoia. "Well, Christopher has always had a good sense for people," she'd say, "and Jessica, she's always been a very private person." She wasn't lying for him, but she was protecting his narrative, protecting him from the painful truth that her son's behavior was not normal or acceptable. Meanwhile, Jessica's father was a storm cloud of rage. He wanted to pull her off the set. "This is insane," he told me, his voice shaking. "He's a sick man, and my daughter is letting him drag her and my granddaughter through the mud." What kind of man does this? He saw the situation clearly, but he was powerless because Jessica had committed to seeing this through. On stage, the tension was a physical presence. I let them lay it all out. Chris, with his timeline of supposed betrayals and his misinterpretations of reality. Jessica, with her litany of emotional abuses and her cold, defiant anger. The audience was like a tennis crowd, their heads swiveling back and forth. They'd sympathize with Jessica's pain, then they'd be swayed by the conviction in Chris's voice. I had to stop them. "Hold on," I said, holding up my hand. "We're going to get to the envelope. But I need you both to understand something. This envelope is not a magic wand. It's not going to fix this. Chris, let's say it says you are the father. What then? Do you apologize for 2 years of psychological torture? Do you suddenly trust her? Because this isn't about biology anymore. You have a trust problem that has metastasized like a cancer. And Jessica, if it says he's the father, you get to say, I told you so. And then what? You go home with a man who needed a TV host to validate the legitimacy of his own child. What does that victory look like in the morning? What does it feel like? They just stared at me. It was the first time, I think, that either of them had been forced to look past the immediate moment of vindication. They were so focused on winning the argument that they had never stopped to consider what they were destroying in the process. They were fighting over who was right, while the relationship itself was bleeding out on the floor between them, and I was the one holding the results that would either be a tourniquet or a final fatal blow. This is the crucible, the moment of confrontation. It's not just about opening an envelope. It's about tearing open the carefully constructed narratives people build to protect themselves. My job is to hold up a mirror, and that mirror doesn't care if you like what you see. Chris, I started leaning forward, my voice calm but firm. I've listened to your evidence, a text message, a receipt, a picture from 10 years ago. Let's be honest. Is this the work of a rational mind, or is this the work of a man who is terrified? He bristled immediately. I'm not terrified. I'm smart. I see things people miss. No, I said, cutting him off. You see things that aren't there. You're a conspiracy theorist in your own home. You've created a story where Jessica is the villain because it's easier than facing the truth. And what's the truth? He shot back, his voice rising in defiance. That you are profoundly insecure, that you don't believe you are worthy of her love. So instead of accepting it, you test it. You push it, you poke it, you try to break it, just to see if it will hold. And you've been doing it so relentlessly that you have shattered the very thing you were so afraid of losing. You haven't been protecting your relationship. You've been the one actively dismantling it, piece by painful piece. You think she's the one with the secret? The secret, Chris, is that you've been looking for an exit ramp since day one. You've been looking for a reason to run, and this paternity question is the excuse you've settled on. It's your get-out-of-jail-free card for your own commitment issues. He was stunned into silence. You could see the gears turning in his head. The anger in his eyes was replaced for a fleeting second by a flash of raw panic. It was the look of a man who had just been seen, truly seen, for the first time. He wasn't the righteous victim anymore. He was just a scared man. Then I turned to Jessica. And you, Jessica, you're not blameless here. Her head snapped up, shocked. She had been sitting there, soaking in Chris's takedown, feeling vindicated. She was the martyr. She was the one who had endured. You think you're the hero of this story, I continued, the long-suffering saint. But saints don't enable. You have participated in this dance every step of the way. You knew from the beginning he was insecure and controlling. You saw the red flags, but you stayed. Why? Because I loved him, she said, her voice trembling. No, I corrected her gently. That's the easy answer. The real answer is that you have a pattern of choosing men you need to fix. It makes you feel needed. It makes you feel powerful in a dysfunctional way. You get a sense of superiority from his paranoia. Every time he accuses you and you know you're innocent, you get a little hit of self-righteousness. Look at this crazy man. I'm so much better, so much saner. You traded your peace for a role. You have been a willing participant in this toxic drama. You could have left 100 times. You could have put up boundaries. You could have demanded therapy, but you didn't. Instead, you agreed to come on national television to settle a paternity dispute. You brought your child's intimate details onto this stage. That is not the act of a victim. That is the act of a codependent who has finally found a bigger, grander way to participate in the chaos. The tears that came now were different. They weren't the tears of exhaustion she'd shed before. They were tears of shame. The fortress was gone. The ice had melted, and what was left was a woman who was looking at her own reflection and seeing her own complicity. That's the breakthrough. It's not a single aha moment. It's the slow, painful realization that the story you've been telling yourself is a lie. They both came here to point a finger at the other. My job was to turn that finger back around on themselves. Now, it was time for the envelope. I held it up. This piece of paper has an answer in it, I said, looking from one to the other, but it's not the answer you think it is. The real answer isn't in this envelope. It's in the fact that we're sitting here at all. It's in the fact that your relationship has deteriorated to the point where you need a DNA test on a television show to find your footing. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Before I open this, I need a commitment from both of you. Not to each other, but to yourselves. Chris, you have to get help for your insecurity and your controlling behavior, whether you're the father or not, because this will destroy every relationship you ever have. Jessica, you have to get help to understand why you tolerate this, why you are drawn to this chaos, and why you put up with being emotionally abused. Because if you don't, you will simply find another Chris in a different body. They both nodded, their faces stripped bare of all pretense. They were no longer adversaries. They were two broken people sitting in the rubble of what they had built. I tore open the envelope. I unfolded the paper. I looked at the result. Then I looked at them. Chris, I said, my voice quiet. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. You are Lily's father. There was no explosion, no triumphant shout from Jessica or dramatic collapse from Chris. The moment the truth finally landed, the truth Chris had weaponized and Jessica had clung to as a shield, it was met with a deafening silence. It was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting stops, when all you can hear is the ringing in your own ear. The air, which had been crackling with tension, suddenly felt heavy, thick with the ghost of 1,000 accusations, 1,000 sleepless nights, and 2 years of corrosive doubt. Chris just deflated. It wasn't a gradual leak. It was as if someone had pulled a plug and all the righteous fury, all the manic energy, all the self-assured victimhood drained out of him at once. He slumped in his chair, his shoulders caving in, and he stared at his hands in his lap. He didn't look at Jessica. He didn't look at me. He just stared at his own empty hands. The narrative that had sustained him, the belief that he was the wrong party on a noble quest for truth, had just been publicly and irrefutably demolished, and he had nothing to replace it with. He was a general whose war had been declared a fiction, leaving him standing alone in a uniform that now felt like a clown suit. Jessica's reaction was even more telling. She didn't pump her fist in the air. She didn't turn to him with a smug, "I told you so." She simply closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of joy. It was a tear of profound, bottomless grief. She had won. She had gotten the validation she craved. But in that moment, she understood what I had tried to tell her. The victory was hollow. The price of proving she was right was the confirmation that she had given her love, her body, and her child to a man who needed a court-admissible document to believe in them. She had won the battle. But looking at the broken man beside her, she finally realized she had lost the war a long, long time ago. I let them sit in that silence for a moment. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people experience the weight of their own reality without distraction. After a few beats, I spoke softly. Chris, look at me. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were blank, lost. I was so sure, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. I know, I said. You built a case, you gathered your evidence, you believed your own story. But your story was never about the facts, Chris. It was about your fear. And today, your fear was proven to be a liar. The question is, what are you going to do now? You have a daughter you have, on some level, rejected for her entire life because of a fantasy in your head. You can't undo that. You can't take back the nights you stared at her looking for a stranger's face. But you can decide from this moment forward who you are going to be as her father. How? He asked, his voice cracking. How do I fix this? You don't fix it, I told him. You start earning it back. You start by getting on your knees and apologizing to this woman, not just for doubting her, but for terrorizing her. Then you go home and you find a therapist. You dig into the black hole of insecurity that's driving this bus, and you don't stop until you figure out where it comes from. You owe that to your daughter. Then I looked at Jessica. Jessica, you got your truth. What are you going to do with it? She opened her eyes and looked at Chris. For the first time, I didn't see contempt or anger in her gaze. I saw a flicker of something much sadder, pity. I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible. I thought this would fix everything. I thought if he just knew, we could go back. There is no going back, I stated plainly. That's a fantasy. The relationship you had is over. It died of 1,000 cuts, inflicted by both of you. You can't build a future on a foundation this rotten. The question for you is not whether you can save this relationship. The question is whether you can save yourself and create a healthy environment for your daughter. Whether that includes Chris in the future depends entirely on the work he is willing to do, and whether you're willing to accept anything less than a whole and healthy partner. This is the part of the show that people often miss. They focus on the big reveal, the drama of the confrontation, but the real work begins when the cameras stop rolling. We provide resources. We set them up with top-tier therapists in their hometown, both for individual counseling and, if they ever get to that point, co-parenting therapy. We gave Chris the number for a specialist in obsessive thoughts and relational anxiety. We gave Jessica a counselor who focused on codependency and establishing healthy boundaries. But I'm not naive. I've been doing this for a long time. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I can give them the tools, the roadmap, but they have to choose to walk the path. And in that moment, sitting on my stage, they were two people lost in a forest of their own making, and the truth wasn't a compass, it was just a signpost that read, "You are here." And here was a terrible, painful place to be. I knew the road ahead for them was going to be long and fraught. The trust wasn't just broken, it had been systematically pulverized. Rebuilding it wouldn't be a matter of forgiveness. It would be a matter of complete and total resurrection, and frankly, I wasn't sure either of them was up to the task. The follow-up is where you see the real story unfold. A month after the show, my team checked in. The initial report was predictable. They were still living together, but in separate rooms. The house was a cold war zone of silent breakfasts and tense handoffs of their daughter, Lily. Jessica was going to her therapy sessions. She was beginning to unpack the patterns in her life, realizing that her relationship with Chris was an echo of her relationship with her alcoholic father, a man she was constantly trying to please, to manage, to fix, never feeling good enough. She was starting to see her love for Chris not as a pure romantic emotion, but as a complicated mix of pity, responsibility, and a deep-seated need to be the sane one in a chaotic dynamic. She was waking up, but it was a slow and painful process. Chris was a different story. He went to one therapy session. One. He told the therapist and later my producer that he didn't see the point. He had the answer now. He was the father. The problem, in his mind, was solved. He'd apologized to Jessica, mumbled, "I'm sorry," okay? In the kitchen one night, and he expected that to be the end of it. He believed that since the core accusation had been proven false, everything else should just reset to zero. He didn't grasp the concept of emotional fallout. He didn't understand that the DNA result didn't magically erase 2 years of psychological damage. He was like a man who had set a house on fire and after the fire department put it out, couldn't understand why the family didn't want to immediately move back into the charred, smoky remains. He tried to overcompensate with Lily. He bought her mountains of toys. He'd take her to the park and post dozens of pictures online with hashtags like #GirlDad and #ProudFather. It was all a performance. He was trying to convince the world and himself that he was the man he should have been all along. But Jessica told us that at home, he was still distant. He'd play with Lily for 5 minutes, get bored, and retreat to his phone. He still didn't know how to just be with her, because for so long, she had been a symbol of his potential betrayal, not his daughter. He was trying to love the idea of her, but he was still struggling to connect with the actual child. The second follow-up, 3 months later, was when the final demolition occurred. Jessica called my producer in tears. Chris had come to her with a new accusation. He had found an old email she had sent to a college friend complaining about his jealousy early in their relationship. In his mind, this was a new betrayal. "You were turning people against me from the start," he'd screamed. "You were building a case against me." And that was it. That was the moment Jessica's last bit of hope died. It wasn't about the paternity test. It was never about the paternity test. It was about a fundamental flaw in his thinking, an inability to see reality outside the prism of his own insecurity. The target of his paranoia had simply shifted. Before it was, "Are you cheating?" Now it was, "Are you plotting against me?" The disease was still there, only the symptom had changed. She finally did what she should have done 2 years prior. She told him to leave. She told him he could see Lily, but only through supervised visits until he could prove he was in consistent, meaningful therapy and was emotionally stable. It was the hardest and the healthiest decision she had ever made. She had finally stopped playing her part in the drama. She had walked off the stage. Of course, he didn't take it well. There were angry voicemails, manipulative text. He told her she was vindictive, that she was using their daughter to punish him now that she'd been proven right. He couldn't or wouldn't see that his own behavior was the cause. In his story, he was still the victim. The narrative had just shifted again. First, he was the victim of a potential liar. Now, he was the victim of a bitter woman who wouldn't let him be a father. This is what I mean when I say the truth doesn't always set you free. For Chris, the truth of his daughter's paternity did nothing to free him from the prison of his own mind. He was still locked inside, rattling the bars, blaming the guards, blaming the other prisoners, blaming everyone but the person who held the key, himself. He never did the work. He just looked for a new lock to pick, a new conspiracy to unravel. My final contact with them was a year after the show. Jessica was doing remarkably well. She had her own apartment, She was in a support group for women who had been in emotionally abusive relationships. She was learning to set boundaries, to trust her own voice. She told my producer that Lily was thriving, that their little home was a place of peace, not anxiety. She was co-parenting with Chris, but with very strict, legally defined rules. He saw Lily twice a month at a supervised center. He still hadn't stuck with therapy, but he was at least behaving appropriately during the visits. Jessica said something to my producer that has stuck with me ever since. She said, "The Dr. Phil show didn't save my relationship, it ended it. And I am so grateful that it did." I thought I was there to win an argument, but I was really there to get a diagnosis. Not just for him, but for me. That's the outcome. Not a happily ever after, but a painful, necessary, and ultimately hopeful amputation. They didn't grow together, they grew apart. And in that separation, at least one of them found a path to genuine health. It's not the fairy tale ending people want, but it's real. Sometimes the most successful outcome isn't putting a relationship back together. It's giving one or both people the clarity and strength to walk away from the wreckage. Chris may never change. He may spend his whole life chasing shadows and blaming the world for his own unhappiness. But Jessica broke the cycle. And in doing so, she gave her daughter a chance at a life free from the suffocating poison of his paranoia. And sometimes that's the only victory that truly matters.